Invincible Season 2 is underway. The first 4 episodes came out throughout November of last year, but the rest of the season got delayed until this week, which is fine. Things like this take time, but with Robert Kirkman wanting 7 to 8 seasons, I hope they don't take too long. I'd be rather annoyed, no, angry if the show's finale didn't come out before I was lying on my deathbed. Needless to say, the show has captured my attention. It's the only superhero show to ever pique my interest, and I care a lot about the story being told. I'm not alone in this, the show is very popular. It's one of the few shows me and my friends can talk about for hours. All things considered, if it stays as popular as it is, I see no reason why Amazon wouldn't renew it for the 8 seasons that Kirkman wants. So 2 things are true. Invincible is a very popular show and a lot of people care about it. And because those 2 things are true, a lot of people are going to get mad when they see flaws in the story, writing, and characters. When Season 1 was airing in March and April of 2021, there was one character who was almost universally hated. Amber. Everyone, and I mean everyone, was talking about how much of a bitch this character was. Many people took issue with how she treated the protagonist, Mark, dumping him then coming back to him in the finale acting as though nothing had ever happened. There were scenes upon scenes people would point to as examples of Amber acting like a sociopath, saying that anyone who empathized with the character was a manipulative and emotionally abusive person. Others would disagree, saying that Amber acted rationally considering the situation she was in, and that people hated the character for other reasons, saying that Amber acted like anybody would in the uniquely stressful situation she was in, and anyone who didn't understand that must have never been in a relationship, or didn't like Amber because she was a woman, or black. It was a lot of ad hominems on both sides. Toxicity in the community for a TV show adaptation of a comic book superhero? What? It was a heated debate for some time. Now, a little over 2.5 years later, and just 4 episodes later, we will be trying to figure out the answer to the question, was Amber really that bad? To start out here, let's remember who these characters are. Amber is a confident young girl, a senior in high school who has a lot of friends. She has connections with some of the popular kids in her grade because she fills up her time with extracurricular activities, mainly community service. Mark is another senior in high school, but he isn't confident because his entire childhood he has staked his confidence in getting his superpowers. And when we first meet him, he still hasn't gotten them. His only close friend is William. At the end of the day, instead of playing sports or joining social groups, he goes to work a minimum wage job to fund his niche hobbies and expensive collections. Amber can get pretty frustrated if you push her buttons, but before we see the 2 date, Amber seems like the calmer one of the 2. Mark is definitely angsty, especially before and around the time he first gets his powers, probably because Amber has had a more stable upbringing and home life when you consider the fact that Mark has big shoes to fill and higher expectations at the house. While a lot of them are self-imposed, anybody would have the same expectations for themselves if their dad was a superhero and they were supposed to inherit his powers. While Amber is ambitious, her goals are reasonable. And in stark contrast to Mark, she is happy with her progress towards those goals. These aren't 2 people who would normally be friends or talk to each other much in school. Not that being one type of these kids is better than the other. Lord knows I was way more like Mark in high school, but knowing that, let's fast forward to the first time they interact in the show. Mark sees Amber getting harassed by the school bully, Todd. After things escalate, Mark decides that he's going to get involved. He walks up behind Todd and says,
I think Amber's been pretty clear about how she feels, Todd.
Todd knocks Mark down with 2 punches and is about to stomp on him before Amber kicks him in the balls. Todd runs off and Amber awkwardly thanks Mark as William helps him to his feet. Now, why did Mark try to help Amber here? It isn't because he knows her or particularly likes her, or because he's so bothered by what Todd is doing that he has to say something. He intervenes because he knows he's close to getting his powers, and he hopes that by doing something heroic he unlocks them deep within. The next time Mark and Todd meet, Todd is mad at him for what happened the day before. The difference is now Mark has his powers. Training with his dad earlier that day, he was hurt by a punch and disappointed that he looked weak in front of him. Mark wants to prove that he can take a punch. So when Todd comes looking for a fight, Mark lets Todd hit him. Todd hits Mark a few times and he doesn't flinch as he keeps goading him on. Amber wasn't there, but a crowd in school saw it and word got around. Just a couple of days later, the story has been exaggerated quite a bit. By the time Amber and her friends hear it, Mark got hit 20 times and didn't even flinch once. And Todd was so freaked out that he spent a few days out of school. Amber hears this as she sees Mark hanging out with Eve, one of the most popular girls at the school. And that is the first moment we see Amber interested in Mark. A lot of people use this as an example as to why Amber is manipulative. After Mark stood up for her, she's only interested in dating him after she sees him talking to a more popular girl. I don't think that's a fair criticism of Amber. When Mark stands up for Amber, he doesn't exchange words with her after, he doesn't check in on her later to see if she's okay. Not to mention he got beat up pretty quickly and she had to step in and save him. While Amber did say she appreciated a man who was willing to take a punch for her, there was nothing impressive or attractive about what Mark did. Not to mention it was kind of obvious that he was doing what he did for himself. Instead of stepping between Amber and Todd trying to put some space between them, he walks up behind Todd and says, "Leave her alone." Having little to no previous interactions with Mark, this was probably a weird encounter. Just a few days later, Amber hears that Mark was able to take a way bigger beating from Todd. But this time he just stood there and took it without showing any pain. Remember, the story is very exaggerated by the time it reaches her, and she sees him have the confidence to talk to one of the hottest and most popular girls in his grade, and she even seems interested in hanging out with him. Seeing someone go from awkward and pathetic to confident and strong within the span of a week would definitely make people curious about that person. It's easy to see how Amber gained interest, so Amber has Todd give Mark her phone number. She does this by blackmailing Todd with old photos of him as a kid. Todd was mean and aggressive to Amber. I don't feel sympathy for the character. However, this does show that Amber isn't above petty blackmail to get people to do things for her that she could easily do herself. People like to say that Amber stole Mark away from Eve, but Amber did explicitly ask if Mark and Eve were dating, and heard both that they were not and that Eve already had a boyfriend. If you want to blame anyone for this, blame Rex. At this point, there isn't really much to work with in terms of Amber's character, and she really hasn't done much out of the ordinary up to this point. So let's fast forward to their first date. Mark calls Amber's number and they playfully chat a little bit before they schedule a study date. Their first date takes place in Mark's room. Before the date, William tries to get Mark to read up on all of Amber's interests. When Amber comes in and sees the book she's interested in, Mark is straightforward. He says,
William said I should read it to show you that I'm interesting, and I will, but this is more me.
And Amber says she appreciates the honesty, foreshadowing to a trait that becomes very important this season. They're really hitting it off until Cecil calls Mark to do a job in South Dakota. Now, I don't need to say where in South Dakota because you already know. Not because you've seen the show, but because there's only one interesting place in South Dakota. So now he has to go pause his date to be a superhero. He's gone for about an hour fighting a silly little bad guy, and when he gets back, Amber is pissed. She is reasonably mad that he asked her to hang out and wasn't able to. She's about to walk out on him, and then he asks her why she came in the first place, and it works. She talks about liking that Mark was willing to take a hit for her. Instead of throwing punches, he was willing to take them. And she liked that. This was the first time it happened, it came out of the blue. Amber was willing to hear Mark out even though she really didn't need to. Amber does well here, but as the series goes on, that doesn't really continue. They go on a few more dates together, and for the most part, things go pretty much the same way. Mark has to leave in the middle, but he always finds a way to make up for it. His wallet, and Amber is generally forgiving at first but quickly starts to get annoyed. It should be noted that Mark is not balancing any of his responsibilities well right now. He quits his job after they complain about his lack of punctuality, and the school administrators get onto him about his slipping grades. Mark should be getting his life together, and although his new responsibilities are daunting, he should have adapted by now. At this point, Amber has every right to be frustrated with Mark. Amber doesn't know that Mark is a superhero, and all of the excuses he comes up with sound fake. She goes out of her way to ask Mark's friend Eve if anything's happening in his life, anything's going on that's preventing him from being able to make these scheduled events. She gives him another chance and makes it clear that it's his last. I think that ultimatums are perfectly fine in relationships. It's a heavily debated topic, but sometimes you need to sit down with whoever you're dating and say, hey, I love you, I don't want to break up with you, but your time management is terrible, and if you can't fix it, we can't have a future together. Especially in high school and college, you can't hold yourself down to people whose flaws are going to negatively impact your life. Mark misses the event because he loses a fight and ends up in critical condition. Eve covers for him, telling Amber that he was hit by a bus. Amber is willing to forgo the fact that she told Mark it was his last chance because this time it was genuinely an emergency. I don't know if you know this, but getting hit by a bus, pretty big deal. For the most part, it's after this encounter where people take issue with how Amber acts. Mark and Amber go on a college tour with William. It's a nice outing for the three of them. Then the school is attacked by a cyborg, who was just a few days before voice acted by Justin Roiland.
I think we can all agree you're better without vocal cords.
Amber starts trying to rally people to help injured students get out safely. Mark manages to slip away and put on his superhero suit, and he saves William just before he's killed. It's at this point that William realizes that Mark is Mark and the cyborg are pretty much equally matched. However, Mark manages to slip off his mask and he sees his own reflection and kills himself. Mark tells William that he can't tell anyone his secret and flies off right as Amber and Rick arrive, and William keeps his secret. Mark runs back to the scene after removing his disguise, and Amber is mad at him for running away, leaving them in danger. This is a reasonable thing to be mad about if Amber didn't know that Mark was invincible. We'll get to that later. Amber wouldn't expect Mark, a regular guy, to fight a cyborg. The expectations for him were to help get everyone out safely, and from Amber's perspective, he left her to do that as he ran away. If that's what she believed happened, then she was right to call him out for being a coward in front of everyone. If she did know that he was invincible, then what she did was wrong. If she knew that Mark was invincible and saw him save everyone's life, then lambasted him for running away, that's really mean no matter what way you look at it. Trying to shame him into admitting his secret identity to her because she wanted to hear it from him in that moment by emasculating and embarrassing him in front of his friends and the public was manipulative and psychotic. She wouldn't be in the wrong for wanting to hear the truth from him or confronting him about it later, but the way she did it was done with the intent of causing him pain. She knew he couldn't clear things up in front of everyone else, so she put him in a situation where he had to stand there and listen to accusations about him that he knew weren't true. After that, Amber meets up with a frat guy and goes to a party with him, and Mark sees the two of them talking at the party. While they are talking, Amber says that she was seeing a guy, but at this point she considers the relationship to be over. So she has no obligation to not be flirtatious with this guy she just met. Mark doesn't talk to her at the party, because he gets sent a video of William being carried away by a cyborg similar to the one that attacked them in the park earlier. He's able to save William, but not Rick, as he experiences what is up to this point the most traumatic event in his life. Emphasis on up to this point. The next day they go home in a car ride, which is so long and awkward that it probably would have made me resort to hard drug use. William drops Amber off at her house, and this is when Mark tries to talk to her one last time. This is definitely the scene that people say is Amber's worst moment. Let's take a look.
Hey, Amber. See you later.
Amber!
Uh-huh.
Come on, this is dumb.
Mark finally admits to Amber that he's a superhero. He apologizes for not being able to tell her up to this point, but promises to make things right. Amber tells Mark that she already knew and had known for weeks. We don't know the exact timeline of events, but here is what we do know. The cyborg attacks took place just a couple days before, so Amber is claiming to have known during that. It is possible that Amber is bluffing, but if she is, she has the best poker face in the world, and I wouldn't expect that from any 17-year-old. Now call me crazy, but I think she found out when Mark got out of the hospital after claiming to be hit by a bus. After all of his friends corroborated that just a week ago, he was hit by 15 tons of steel moving at 35 miles an hour. Something people like to say is that Amber expected Mark to help in the soup kitchen instead of being out and saving lives. And that would be a selfish and dumb expectation for her to have, but I don't think she has that expectation. For one, I'm pretty sure that the soup kitchen was slightly before Amber figured out that Mark was a superhero. And secondly, after Mark admits to Amber that he is invincible, she's mad at him for not being honest. She doesn't complain about his time management. Amber goes on to explain that what Mark did made her feel stupid and unimportant. Which begs the question, does Amber need to be the smartest and most important in a relationship to feel validated? If the two were married or had been dating for years, then yeah, it would be reasonable for Amber to think that Mark saw her as stupid and unimportant. But let's remember that these two have been dating for a few months and they are still in high school. Mark said that he would like to go to the same college as her, but other than that, there weren't really any long-term commitments between the two of them. People are going to keep secrets in the early stages of a relationship. For example, medical history or financial status. And just because you aren't told immediately or expected to figure it out, that doesn't mean that you're unimportant or stupid. It just means that you need to be trusted for a longer period of time. But Amber is mad that Mark didn't trust her after a relatively short period of time. Mark responds by saying,
I'm trusting you now!
which is met with,
Oh my god. I mean, it's cute you think that's enough.
this line is probably what struck a nerve with a lot of people, because Mark opened up about the one thing he had to keep from her, and she treated him poorly. It wasn't even the fact that she still broke up with him, because honestly, Mark wasn't a very good boyfriend. He could have thought of more complicated excuses than, sorry, I'll stop being a jerk, or something important popped up. He was so vague to the point where I didn't know if his poor communication skills were intentional or not. It could have just been bad writing. Maybe this was the writer's way of trying to portray how bad teenage boys usually are at communicating. I'm not sure, but there isn't one instance where Mark said, I wish I could tell you what's going on, but I can't. Or there are things I can't tell you or else you'll be in danger. While Amber might not have liked these excuses, or they could have led to her figuring out his secret identity sooner, or made her think that he was a schizophrenic, they might have gone a long way in helping ease the tension between the two of them. But I can't blame Mark here because I more than understand why he wouldn't run that risk. Because Amber seemed to care of being thought about as stupid or unimportant more than she did about him telling her his secret identity in that moment. From the beginning, they set up honesty as an important trait to Amber. Then in this scene revealed it was mostly for selfish reasons, butchering the setup. Amber genuinely doesn't seem to care at all about what Mark has been through. The fact that he's been out saving lives and the fact that he's willing to be vulnerable with her now. Even if she wasn't interested in a relationship with him anymore, which she was, she could have definitely been nicer about it and given more than just a couple of insults in the moment. This is why a lot of people hate her character. Because even though she has a right to be mad, the dialogue portrays her as being mad for the wrong reasons. Mark leaves. He tries to talk about everything with William. And honestly, William gives him some pretty solid advice here. When Mark says he doesn't want to be a superhero anymore because it's ruined all his friendships, his relationship, and his grades suck, William says,
Okay, stop. Enough with the sulking, you big baby.
What?
You can fly. You're invulnerable. Your dad's the greatest superhero on Earth, and your mom loves and cares about you. You just need to study and you can pull up your grades.
You really can't get better advice than that. Due to his blunt delivery, however, Mark goes to talk to Eve instead. This is another scene that Invincible fans don't really like. Mark talks to Eve about the relationship being over and he says,
I thought once I told her the truth, we'd be good. Stupid.
While the issue is genuinely more complicated than that, Eve's response isn't really fair. Eve calls him naive. And when Mark brings up the fact that Eve told him to be careful about telling her his identity anyway, she says,
Yeah, but I didn't tell you to string her along for 5 months while being an asshole about it.
Now there are definitely a few small things Mark could have done to improve his situation, but how exactly does one be a superhero and maintain a secret identity without stringing somebody along for the first few months of a relationship? No, for real, tell me. The show doesn't. Eve doesn't really understand this because she's only ever dated other superheroes, so she doesn't really have room to criticize him here. This is the key issue with the show's writing for Mark and Amber's relationship. They put the two characters in this unique situation, and when eventually they break up, the entire supporting cast blames Mark without explaining to him what he could have done better. Probably because the writers wrote themselves into a corner, trying this unique idea where the girl breaks up with the protagonist after he reveals he's a superhero. But the way they made her do it made her come off as irrational and mean. There are things I give the writing team props for. Overall, the show is amazing. This in particular is not one of those things. There are ways they could have gone about having Mark and Amber break up that would have been more reasonable as well. All we ever saw out of the relationship was how stressful it was for both of them, with Mark not being able to tell her that he was a superhero, and Amber having a boyfriend that was always on call for work and not knowing why. Amber could have gone with the angle of, it's far too stressful to date a superhero. This isn't the life I want to live. Your communication is terrible, I don't want to deal with it anymore. Instead, they made her seem ungrateful that he had saved her life, and put his health and safety on the line multiple times, all for reasons that seemed rather petty. What happens between this and Mark's next interaction with Amber changes his life forever. William, Eve, and Amber see a lot of what happened televised and know what Mark is going through. Amber goes to check in on Mark seeing if he's okay, immediately hugging and kissing him. Amber did this because she cares about Mark. And after seeing what he went through, she understands why he was doing what he was. She feels really bad for him and decides that she wants to be with him again. Mark was receptive to this and happy that they could date again. Maybe this is because Mark was going through a hard time and needed someone to turn to, or maybe he really loved her. If I were in Mark's shoes, I wouldn't want to have anything to do with Amber at this point. But I'm not Mark. Whenever I'm going through a rough patch, I don't want support from people who have turned their backs on me in the past, because they could just do it again at my lowest moment. There's a point of no return in a relationship where you can't take back things that you said. I think Amber crossed that line, but it doesn't matter what I think. It only matters what Mark thinks. Amber should be conscious of the fact that she said some pretty hurtful things to Mark. She all but told him that she didn't want anything to do with him anymore. She needs to be accepting of the possibility that after everything he feels the same way. The things she said in this conversation do indicate that she would understand if Mark turned her away at this point. And that's pretty much where their story ends, in season 1 anyway. I think there are many reasons people don't like Amber. The main reason is people were expecting better out of their relationship. Mark and Amber's relationship kind of sucked. Even though they cared about each other, the stress they were going through was a huge roadblock. Everyone knew it would be foolish for Mark to tell Amber he was a superhero within just a few months, so we were all waiting for him to be able to trust her enough. Mark's parents seemingly had a good relationship at first, and everybody wanted to see Mark and Amber get to the point where they could have that, especially after having to watch Nolan and Debbie's relationship fall apart. When Mark finally told Amber and she wasn't understanding, it felt like a slap in the face to the audience. People were also mad that Mark was willing to take her back after that. Let's take a step back in this video to what Mark was like before he met Amber. He's a 17-year-old guy who doesn't have a lot of friends. He has poor communication skills. He's emotionally stunted after his upbringing and the expectations he has. It's not unreasonable to see a teenager with abandonment issues taking a girl back after she dumped him like that. When I was 17, I definitely put up with more stuff in a relationship than I would now. In this regard, Amber's writing makes sense as well. She's not understanding of Mark, and a lot of the things that people point to as her being manipulative is just her being wishy-washy. Again, she's 17. Even though it doesn't make sense for Mark to reveal his identity after just 5 months, 5 months is a long relationship to a 17-year-old. When she runs in and asks if Mark needs any support after what happened, she isn't trying to manipulate him. Her mind just did a complete 180 as to what the situation actually was. Let me reiterate, 17-year-olds are really stupid. And I think it made people hate Amber more was the fact that William and Eve blame Mark entirely for the situation. And the show does little to nothing to explain how Mark should have handled the situation. Seeing somebody, make a few mistakes but doing their best given a bad situation, it can get angering to see them blamed for everything. And it makes sense that some of that blame was directed at Amber. Season 2 does more to rectify how the characters Eve and Amber were written in the first season, with Eve being portrayed as somebody who doesn't completely understand how the world works yet, accidentally creating a park on unsafe land. And Amber is far more understanding and supportive after taking her first steps into adulthood. It's only their first few weeks of college, so we'll see how that ends up going. Was Amber really that bad? She definitely should have been more understanding as to why Mark would keep everything a secret from her, and it was irrational for her to think that him not telling her was an insult to her intelligence and importance. But her breaking up with Mark and then asking him to take her back isn't manipulative like people say. The worst thing she did was shame Mark for running away during the cyborg attacks, even though she knew he saved everyone. Whether she did it to light a fire under him to tell her everything, or if she just wanted to embarrass him to get back at him for not telling her, it was manipulative and vindictive. While some of her irrational anger can be explained by the fact that she's young, not all of it can. While people do over-exaggerate it, she wasn't as bad as everyone says. Amber definitely did a few cruel things to Mark, and wasn't a very good person in Season 1.